Governor Larry Hogan, thanks so much.
It's great to be with you.
Almost 8 years. How's it feel?
Well, first of all, it's hard to believe that it's been 8 years. In some ways, it seems like it went really quickly. In other ways, it seems like decades. But it feels good, actually. I feel like I'm leaving. I feel like I'm mission accomplished, that we left it all on the field, and we had a great team, worked really hard, and I think Maryland's in better shape now than it was when we got here. And yeah, I'm ready to move on.
We'll get to that in a minute. But speaking of this room, there's been a lot of news that's happened in this room. We've asked a lot of questions in this room. This is where you talked about your cancer diagnosis, looking at just what all has happened between the uprising in Baltimore City, your cancer battle and success story on the other side, COVID-19. Did you think about all of those things when you ran for governor the first time?
Of course not. You know, we came in here with a whole lot of things that we wanted to get done, and priorities that we focused on. And I feel like we actually got all of the things that we said we were going to do, we did. But we also were hit with challenges that we never imagined were going to hit us. Both on the, so we started out, I was only governor for 89 days when the riots broke out in Baltimore, the worst violence in 47 years in our largest city after the death of Freddie Gray. And then, 60 days after that, I was diagnosed with advanced and aggressive cancer. And then we did, this COVID, the worst global pandemic in 100 years, that lasted for 2.5 years or more. None of that was expected, but we led through all of it, and we continue to try to make the best decisions to keep Marylanders safe. And we still got our other work done, but I'll tell you, those are three things you can't be prepared for, but you have to be able to lead through.
Was there ever a moment, especially with COVID, where you were thinking, this is more than anyone can handle, this is too much?
Well, COVID was bad because, it's like you're prepared, you can gear up for, say, a natural disaster. It's a hurricane is coming, and then it goes away. Or it's hitting in one place, but not everywhere else. And this was like the hurricane that kept crashing on the, blowing through, every day for 2 years all over the world. And so it really never let up. The stress was unbelievable throughout that. We literally had thousands of people working day and night, 7 days a week, trying to keep people safe. And it was, of all the things, that was probably the most stressful, because it wasn't, I was battling cancer, I had to try to worry about my life, and I had to worry about my family. And in the riots in Baltimore, I was trying to keep the people of Baltimore safe. During COVID, I had to worry about every single person in Maryland, and whether we could keep our hospitals from overflowing, and whether we could keep people from dying, and whether we could keep our businesses from dying as well. We're trying to balance lives and livelihoods, and there was just literally hundreds and hundreds of difficult decisions, and it was almost every single day for 2 years.
Some people on the right who were supporters of the former President Donald Trump gave you the nickname of Lockdown Larry, which, do you think that was fair?
I mean, it was kind of a cute name. I don't think it was fair. Look, we had the best health and economic recovery in America, and we had the highest approval of our response for handling the crisis. 86% of the people in Maryland approved of the job that we did. So a handful of people on the left didn't think we did enough, and a handful of people on the right thought we did too much, but almost everyone else thought that we handled it really well.
During the pandemic, too, there was the controversy about the test kits from South Korea. Looking back, do you believe that was the right move?
I think it was probably one of the biggest successes of the entire pandemic. I mean, when there were no testing in America, we were able to get 500,000 tests. At the time, we were, it was more than the top 3 or 4 states in America had. And we used every single one of the tests. Every single one of them were great, and they saved lives.
What happened with the swap when the test kits had to be sent back?
Well, first of all, I mean, there are no rules. Nobody in America has tests. Donald Trump is going on TV saying anyone who wants a test can get a test, and I'm going on television saying that's not true. Mm-hmm. So we spent 28 days trying to get a foreign country to agree to send us tests. The tests were good, but the EUA changed. And so some of the technical aspects of the test with the FDA approval changed after 28 days and after having to fly them in with a Korean Air jet. So the company agreed to switch to a different formulation and send them to us almost for free, just for the handling charges. So they swapped out. And then we used every single one of the 500,000 tests and bought a couple of million more and used them all and didn't have a single problem with not even one test.
You don't regret that? Given all the controversy?
It was all a bunch of nonsense. It was like, Trump didn't like the fact that he couldn't get tests, but we could. The Democrats in the legislature, even though we were working hard to save lives, were looking to criticize us. There was absolutely nothing wrong with that. I'm very proud of the effort. And I think it was one of the most important steps in the whole crisis.
Looking at the legislature, obviously coming in, we're going to have a one-party rule in the state with Westmore coming in as governor. Yeah. The Democrats obviously have a stronghold on the General Assembly. Does that concern you moving forward, looking at the state and the future of what's next?
Well, it reminds me of the way it was in 2014 when I ran for governor. There was a monopoly where every single statewide elected office was Democrat. 70% of both houses of the legislature were Democrat. And I just hope, and I've talked to the incoming governor, Westmore, and I sat down, had a great conversation. He asked for advice, and one big piece of advice I gave him was, don't let it go back to the way it was in 2014, because that was a time when the voters were really frustrated. That's how I became governor. It's 48% of all Marylanders wanted to move out of the state because they had raised taxes 43 times in a row. They had crushed 8,000 businesses and 100,000 jobs. So they now have the ability to go do that again. But my advice to the governor-elect was, I wouldn't go back to that if I were you. I mean, Martin O'Malley left as the least popular governor in America, and you wouldn't want to go back to that.
Did he seem open to it?
I think he seems like a nice guy, smart guy. His team's been working very closely with us, and I'm not going to criticize or question or whatever. I know he's excited about being governor, and I'm hopeful that he's going to find some balance, because that really is what people, we know 75% of the people in Maryland really like the way that we've been governing, and they like the balance.
Mm-hmm. Looking at some of the past legislation, and in Baltimore City, the red line comes up all the time in terms of people's frustrations. What happened with the red line?
First of all, the red line is very unpopular, and it really wasn't going to do anything for Baltimore. So I ran for governor promising that we would not do the red line. Anthony Brown promised that he would. I think about 40% of the people in Baltimore wanted the red line, not a majority, and no one else in the state. So our entire transportation department said it would accomplish nothing. And the Washington Post editorial board said it never made any transportation or economic sense whatsoever. So I'm happy we didn't do the red line. There's a handful of kind of politicians in Baltimore that whine about it all the time, and Baltimore Sun wrote about it hundreds of times. But the vast majority of people in Maryland do not want that built, and it won't do anything to help the people of Baltimore.
What can be done, do you think, or what needs to be done to improve transportation in the city? Because public transportation is less than ideal.
Yeah, we put more money into transit and into roads in Baltimore City than any other governor in history, and we rebuilt the entire transit system, so now all of the buses actually take people from where they live to the employment centers, even outside of the city, so they can take people to places like Trade Point Atlantic, where we've got 14,000 new jobs. But there's still more to be done. But that one, train to nowhere is not going to solve it. We've got to get people from all over the city to the places of employment.
Obviously, for the last 2 years, you and I have talked a lot about crime in Baltimore City. There's been a lot of questions about what's being done, what's not being done. Looking back, is there a moment where you think things could have changed? Was there a pivotal moment that set the city down the wrong path? Or is there something that you wish you could go back and change that could have helped the city even more?
Well, I think we took every step we possibly could to help the city, but you know, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. So we put $1.5 billion into public safety in the city. We spent 8 years sending surges of you know, 21 different organizations, federal, state, local teams into the city to back up the city police. I've met with, you know, 4 mayors and 5 police commissioners. Every single request they've ever had, we've fully funded from the state. And we've constantly tried to communicate with the police commissioners, with the mayors. But you know, I'm not the mayor of Baltimore, and I'm not the police commissioner, and I'm not the prosecutor. You know, we had legislation that we thought was critically important, and to tougher sentences for people to commit felonies with guns, and tougher sentences for repeat violent offenders, who are the ones doing all the killing, 300 murders a year. And every single year, all of the city leaders and all of the city legislators killed those bills, even though over 85% of the people in Baltimore supported them. And so that's my biggest frustration of being governor, that we couldn't get that fixed. But it wasn't for a lack of trying, it was for a lack of cooperation.
Do you think that the leadership, in order for the city, given the state's level of cooperation and willingness to work and the funding that has gone to the city, is the local leaders, are they the ones standing in the way?
Well, I mean, they're the ones that are responsible, and they've got to figure out a new plan, because the plans they've been utilizing are not working. Look, one thing that's very encouraging, we have a new state's attorney who says he does want to focus on prosecuting violent criminals and repeat violent offenders and putting them in jail. And we have a U.S. attorney, Eric Barron, who wants to do the same thing. And we've been meeting with and cooperating with both of them, because that's the thing that hasn't happened. You know, we've got lots of ideas and strategies and plans. We just aren't arresting the bad guys, and we aren't you know, sentencing them, and we're not taking them off the street.
What do you think is at risk if the state doesn't, or the city doesn't get a handle on the crime? Is the state of Maryland at risk if that doesn't change?
Well, look, Baltimore is still an economic engine for the state of Maryland. It's still critically important, but it's nearly half the size that it used to be. Businesses have left, residents have left, and they've got to reverse this trend. And if we can't do something about the crime and the schools, people are going to continue to leave. So I'm hopeful, and I had this conversation with Governor-elect Moore. I'm hopeful that that they can find a way to work together with the folks in the city to encourage them to take some of the actions we've been trying to get them to take.
And speaking of schools, we have Kerwin coming up. More money going to be going into not just the city schools, but all of the public school systems across the state. Do you worry that there's enough accountability built into the Kerwin infrastructure right now to ensure that that money actually gets to the kids? Oh,
no. Look, we've record funded schools 8 years in a row, even before Kerwin, with Baltimore City getting the highest. You know, they get, I think, nearly 2 or 3 times what the other jurisdictions get per pupil. And no, there's not enough accountability. So we also put in a number of pieces of legislation to make the school system more accountable for the money. Most of it was completely watered down. One thing passed, and that was we did get a state education IG that can investigate and make reports to the other places like the state prosecutor. It's just not enough. So, but all the other accountability measures, in fact, they took actions to make us the least accountable school system in America. We were trying to make it more accountable, and the legislature fought to make sure they were less accountable.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's, unfortunately, it's the teachers union's influence on the Democratic legislators, but I don't know why the teachers union has been so adamant about fighting against change. I think they're threatened by it in some ways, but you know, when schools are underperforming, persistently failing, you know, we've got to take actions, and we have to provide options for kids to make sure that they get the opportunities that they deserve. Yeah,
looking at the schools in the city and the crime, we know that the two are linked. Totally. Do you think that in order to get the violence and the crime under control, the school system needs to improve at the same trajectory as the violence going down?
I think it's critically important, and those are the two things I'm most frustrated at, is that we have, in spite of massive amounts of funding, I think Baltimore is the 3rd highest funded school system in America. In spite of that, they have one of the worst performances. In spite of all the money poured into, law enforcement and public safety, we've got violent crime worse than most cities in America. And so it's really the actions that haven't been taken that they've got to go back and be willing to take. And I think we've got to make the schools more accountable, and we've got to make the bad guys more accountable.
Mm-hmm. Looking at just the relationship with some of the leaders, you talked about meeting with all of the various police commissioners and mayors that have come through the city over the last 8 years. Do you think that the public disagreement was beneficial, or do you think that hindered relationship buildings that could have potentially improved the situation?
Well, I mean, the public stuff is only a tip of the iceberg. And we had ongoing meetings, both not only directly with the mayors and police commissioners, with our teams meeting together on an ongoing basis. I think it was kind of overblown, but when I thought that they were failing or refusing to take action, I didn't mind saying so, and I thought it was important to highlight some of the issues. But we did make tremendous efforts to work together. I mean, look, the lack of continuity, the fact that we had 4 mayors and 5 police commissioners while I've been governor is a problem in and of itself. Nobody was there long enough to even, develop a plan and implement a plan.
Do you think that the mayor's 5-year plan that he put in place a year and a half ago now, do you think that's the right approach?
Doesn't seem to be working so far.
Does it worry you that it's a 5-year plan, his term is 4 years, he'll be running for re-election potentially, and there could be, depending on what the voters in Baltimore City want, another new crime plan?
Well, I think the city leaders have got to focus on these. They have a lot of problems and issues, and I'm sure the state leaders are going to continue to try to provide the support that we have to help them. Mm-hmm. But the mayor, the city council president, and all the leaders are going to have to be more responsive to the people, and they're going to have to focus on fixing the school system and fixing the crime problem, or they're probably not going to be all reelected.
And we have term limits now.
I'm very much in favor of term limits. Obviously, so are most of the people in Baltimore. Most of the people in the whole state and the country are as well. But overwhelming, 70-something% of the people voted for it. And now to see, some city council members trying to overturn the will of the people it's outrageous. I mean, the people have spoken pretty clearly.
Yeah, what kind of message do you think that sends to the city and the voters? 72% who said, this is what we want. I
think it sends the message that we don't care what you think. Just like they didn't care that 85 or 86% of them wanted to support our crime plan. Mm-hmm. Just like they don't seem to care that their kids are getting cheated on their ability to get a good quality education. I think maybe it's time for a change with some of those leaders. I mean, the guy who I think is proposing most of this battle on overturning is the same guy that wanted to eliminate the police department, and who in the middle of the disturbances encouraged rioters to go tear down the statues that were honoring fallen police officers. I mean, I'm not sure why he should now be fighting against this, but he's not the kind of guy I think should be in office.
Looking at just the last 8 years and the legacy that you hope to leave with Marylanders, you're a pretty popular governor among a lot of people in the state. What do you think is the biggest legacy that you hope voters will remember?
Well, it's the reason I ran for governor. And so I started by saying I ran for governor. I was a small business guy who was very frustrated with what was happening. 43 taxes in a row, killing our businesses and jobs. And I promised to try to do something about that. So we've cut taxes 8 years in a row by $4.7 billion. I'm the only Republican governor in America to get a Democratic legislature to cut taxes. I inherited a $5.1 billion deficit. We turned it into a $5.6 billion surplus. We were 49th out of 50 states in economic performance. We went to number 6, biggest economic turnaround in America. So the main thing I ran on was on economic issues. I'm going to help small businesses. I'm going to help us create more jobs. I'm going to cut taxes. I'm going to make it a more business-friendly place. I'm going to make it a place that everyone doesn't want to leave, when 48% wanted to leave. And that's exactly what we've done. I mean, it's a complete economic turnaround. And that's the thing I'm most proud of, because it's the one thing I promised to do. It was our mission and why I came here. And it could not possibly have gone any better. I inherited the worst financial situation the state had ever been in, and now I'm turning it over to Governor-elect Moore in the best shape it's ever been in the history of the state.
Do you anticipate that message will resonate with voters outside of the state of Maryland as well?
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm really focused on the people in Maryland right now, and it seems to have resonated pretty well with them. And you know, you mentioned about being pretty popular in the state. It's really a job approval, so it's like, do you approve of the job that they're doing? And a 74% job approval. Mm-hmm. It's not just I'm popular. I'm not that popular. I wasn't very popular in high school, I know, but it's about did they approve of the job? And 3 out of 4 people in the bluest state in America, 3 out of 4 people think that the Republican administration did a pretty good job, and that makes me proud because it's really thousands of people that helped us get the job done, and it's approval of their efforts and their work and their success.
I want to talk about the Republican Party because you've been a vocal critic of the former president and you've been out there talking about your vision for the Republican Party moving forward. There seems to be a conversation about a potential divide within leadership at the RNC. Have you had any conversations about future leadership at the RNC, Ronna McDaniel, potential challengers to that position? Do you agree with where the party is going?
You know, I don't know where they're going, to tell you the truth. I'm trying to figure out where they're going, and I know where I think they should go, but I haven't been involved in that RNC thing at all. You know, I have expressed my concerns and frustrations about the direction. Obviously, it's been the worst 4 to 6 years the Republican Party's ever had in history. We keep losing. We lost the White House, we lost the Senate, and we lost the House. We got it back barely, but it should have been a big red wave considering the fact that the president's popularity is so low and 70% of the people think the country's headed in the wrong direction. But we really underperformed, and it's because we nominated people that were not the best possible candidates. And you know, I've been saying forever, the party's got to develop a more positive, hopeful message that appeals to more people, like we did here in Maryland. You know, if I only tried to play to the base, I would have gotten 20% of the vote. But I tried to focus on things that people cared about, whether they were, you know, Republicans or independents or discerning Democrats. You know, I won 30% of the Democrats and nearly all the independents. And I think the party needs to focus on, you know, moving beyond the base. I was a Reagan guy back when I was younger, and he always talked about building a bigger tent. And that's what the Republican Party needs to do, not shrinking the tent, which is what we've been doing lately.
Do you think Ronna is the right person to lead the RNC forward?
I mean, I don't want to say I don't have a vote, and so I'll let the people that are part of that make that decision. But it's you know, there hadn't been too much success during her tenure, but I think most of that probably has to do with the president rather than her.
Looking at the next couple of weeks, just a few weeks left, winding down, after the inauguration of Governor-elect Wes Moore, you're going to take some time, talk to your family, and then what?
You know, my wife says I need a vacation. We've only had one in 8 years, so right after the 2018 election. So I told her I'd take a couple days, but I'm really looking forward to spending time with my family over the holidays, my kids and my grandkids. And I'm going to try to, you know, not focus on politics, but, you know, sometime next year I'm going to sit down with them, and I'm going to certainly talk over the holidays, but we'll sit down with our teams and see, you know, what's the best possible, you know, how I can serve in the future. But you know, haven't made any decisions at all.
Your trips to Iowa, New Hampshire didn't shore up any decisions?
Well, I really enjoyed the visits to New Hampshire and Iowa and 22 other states. But, you know, I really have also went to 24 counties in Maryland. And I'm going to try to enjoy the next few weeks of being governor, and then enjoy the holidays. And then, you know, there's plenty of time. It's the election's in 24. We just barely got through the 2022 election.
That's the truth, yeah. Is there one moment that you wish that you could relive during your time as governor that was a good moment or a happy moment, joyous moment?
You know, there was a lot of happy moments. Yeah. I'm trying to think of one. I mean, it was the first inaugural, which I'm excited for Governor-elect Moore, but, you know, that's quite a, you know, an emotional, happy time. Something I never imagined accomplishing, and what a overwhelming, you know, challenge that was ahead. But I think that's, you know, not to say the second inaugural wasn't also good, but I think that first time coming in was probably the most, you know, really exciting time. The
purple surfboard, where is that going to live?
The purple surfboard is definitely coming. I may take it with me on that vacation.
Yeah?
Maybe I'll try to ride the purple surfboard.
All right. Governor Hogan, thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you, Mikenzie.